Welcome to Philosophy Cafe. Today we have Jono Hendricks. He's the founder of Option C, Sovereign Stoics, and has his own personal brand. I would also like to remark that he is a very, very dear friend of mine, so it's so cool to have him on. And just want to start off by saying and asking, how are you, man?
I'm good, brother. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Of course, of
You
course.
know, life in Bali here is it's hard to complain. We have
Exactly.
Niepe is like a local holiday that comes once a year. It's like kind of like their new year. So tomorrow is like a day of silence, meditation. You're not even allowed to leave your villa. Um,
Oh my.
so that'll be an interesting thing that's happening tomorrow
E-
morning. Yeah.
Exactly. It's eventful. Yeah, I wasn't there for Niepe, but happy Niepe. I remember last year
Yeah.
when it was
Thank you.
creeping up before my arrival, but it's really fascinating if anyone is not familiar with it. It's a time where everything shuts down, even including your lights, no TV. Some people go as far as not even using their phones and they just have no distractions. They're living in complete silence. And what has your been, while we're on that topic, what has your experience been with Niepe over the past couple of years?
I've done it a few different ways. Like one year we got or not a hotel, an Airbnb with like a group of friends, and then just like played board games and hung out in the Airbnb all day. But most of the time, and what I'll lean in the direction of doing tomorrow is actually embracing the culture of it. And just
Love that.
go silent, don't touch my phone or laptop. I will do some journaling and just deeper reflections, but it's like a day to be with yourself, a day to reset, and just kind of like look into like the new year with new intentions, new perspectives.
Oh,
Yeah,
exactly. It's fascinating
yeah,
because if I'm not mistaken, I think the mythology, the story behind it, because Bali is known as the island of the gods, is that when you're so quiet, all the evil spirits will then leave. And that is supposed to be a
yeah.
day for
That's like
that.
so. Tonight they do a parade. They build all these paper mache statues that are like, I don't know, 5 meters tall, like at their smallest. And they're statues of Ogo Ogo, which is like their kind of like devil. And they build all these statues that like represent their sins for the past year, and then they do these
Oh,
parades with these statues like through the streets, and then at the end of the night they burn the statues.
oh my
And so then
goodness.
it's like burning the sins of the past year. I'm not an cultural expert in this, but from what I understand, it's like burning the sins of the past year. And then the reason that everyone is silent tomorrow is because you've like angered the devil, and so now he's out like looking for you.
Oh
And so
goodness. Gotta
you're
hide.
silent, and then you're not sinning, right? You're not even speaking, you're not eating, you're not
Mm,
using technology, you're not doing anything that could open the door to a sin. So you're just like
exactly.
being and like
It's,
recalibrating your energetic field heading into a new year. Yeah.
oh my goodness. It sounds like the most intense game of hide and seek. Like if you want to take it as far, it's an island-wide version of that. It sounds intense. I wish I could have been there
Yeah,
for it, but I'm glad you get to experience that and are amongst all the Balinese people tomorrow and embracing that
yeah,
together. It just goes to show how colorful their culture is, and that's something that I was very lucky to experience and be shown by you as well while being out
yeah.
there when we connected. But
It's a
before
beautiful
we
island
really get
for sure.
into it, I want to mention that you also have a little coffee there. Thank you for holding up the cafe theme. Any particular kind that's for you there today?
This particular cup is actually just a long black, but
Oh,
there's a cafe here in Bali. It's like the best cafe on the planet, I think, because they have homemade almond milk. It's called BGS. You know BGS. You were here. Yeah,
of course.
yeah, yeah.
I can attest to that
But
for
no, right
sure.
now I'm just long black in it. Coffee's an interesting thing. Also, this is like I don't want to go down the coffee rabbit hole, but like philosophically speaking, like if we look at ideological paradigms, right? Coffee is like one of the most prevalent drugs in our society
For sure.
that is just normalized. Like
It's
people
very
are
true.
just addicted to caffeine, and it's just okay.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
it's such an interesting, like, I mean, myself included, like I have a coffee every morning, right? Like
Likewise, yeah.
it's just a fascinating.
It's embedded into normalcy, right? There's no taboo around it, and therefore we're more prone to interact with it and not feel the guilt around it, never mind its consequences down the road. So our relationship to it is much different from other drugs, if you may.
Mm,
And but yeah, as you had just
right.
remarked there, we have Philosophy Cafe. So this is where we want to dig into the philosophy behind the art and the artist. So on that note, I'd really love to start tapping into option C, sovereign stoics. And if first you could just tell us a little bit about what that entails and its framework as a whole.
Yeah, for sure. Option C is you tangibly you could call it more like a mother brand,
Hmm.
like empirically, um, but it's more in essence it's more of like a cultural bedrock, a foundation of a framework that would allow individuals and result collectives to come together through a shared ideological perception of potential new reality, right? And so what that looks like explicitly is like a way of embodiment, a way of living that is loose enough for the uniqueness of every individual to embody the truth of their unique dharma, but comprehensive enough that we can all align with each other through that outlook, right? And so that looks like shared values and principles, as one key aspect. Another is the mechanism of embodiment, the way of living, right? And this is something that I call the four pillar lifestyle,
Hmm.
which you've heard many people talk about these exact four pillars, but in this specific regard and this specific focal point of embodiment, like physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual. And the idea is that these are literally like the four foundational pillars of what you could call your character, right? Imagine them actually as pillars in your character, as a marble slab on top of them. And the intention, again, individually and then resultantly collectively, is that we're cultivating and activating daily, weekly, monthly, yearly practices within each of these four pillars and establishing a comprehensive understanding, a framework of ourselves for what is balance for us as a unique individual, right? So, and to do so, because if you don't do that, you face the potentiality of trouble, right? A prime
Hmm.
example is in your intellectual pillar. If you overwork, right, and you're overextending yourself, that intellectual pillar will grow and become stronger at the detriment of one or the other three. And so your character will eventually start to become what we could call lopsided. And if it
I
goes on
see.
too long, then it will literally like slide off, insert overwhelm, burnout, desire to escape reality, right?
And would
And
you be able
so,
to touch upon those four pillars and what they mean to you?
yeah, I mean, and the interesting thing too is like I call them the four foundational pillars because
Hmm.
there's much more to who we are than just these four aspects,
For
right?
sure.
And these four aspects intertwine and interweave with each other, right? But the idea is that they're the foundation of who you are, right? And with a strong foundation, then propelling yourself forward into life is much more seamless. But yeah, physical is, obviously health, nutrition, taking care of your body. How much are you moving your body? In what forms and fashions are you moving your body? What kind of food are you consuming? How much water are you drinking? How much sleep are you getting? Emotional is like your social life, your romantic relationships, your sexual activity. Do you or do you not want to have kids? How are you designing the environment within which your heart will experience this
I
reality, right?
see.
Your
Yeah.
emotional aspect. Um, Intellectual is, what you could run synonymously with our mind, right? What kind of media are you consuming? What kind of media are you creating? Why are you doing these things? What is your job? Where are you giving your energetic focus? Are you or are you not partaking in philosophical discussions with friends? If you are, what kind of friends are those? Right? And so where like how are you activating the intellectual aspect of who you are? And then spiritual is like to what extent do you or don't you have a conscious connection with something beyond self, right? You could call that God, universe, source. There's a number of different
Mhm.
terms that we use in today's society, but is that connection alive? Is there some kind of association with the divine? And like if there is, great. What are the practices? How are you pursuing that? Why are you pursuing that, etc.?
Exactly. And if I'm not mistaken, so these are in no particular order, correct?
No, I mean they're just like the four quadrants, you could say, at the foundation of being a human, I would say. Yeah.
And you're saying it's upon the agency of the individual to dissect where they may be lacking or depleted. And would you assume, or would you encourage people to start there?
Yeah, I mean, so like the work that I've been doing over the years and where Option C and Sovereign Stoics and a number of other different positions are growing towards is hold like it's not about like having an answer, right? It's more
Mhm.
about establishing a framework for the individual to procure their own answers.
Yeah, for
Like
sure.
one of the biggest quabbles that I have with the personal growth industry right now, and even the like recovery paradigm, is this like here's the answer, right? Like someone did some 5-step series that worked for them, and then they're like, here, if you do that too, and if I market it and shove it down your throat, then it's going to work for you too, and it's like it's this
Yeah,
very rigid, very linear, very like one
standardized.
size fits all. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So our intention is more so to establish a framework that is useful for individuals to guide themselves into their own truth.
Okay, that makes sense. And that framework is what has deeper roots and meanings with the human condition and with how we operate in a cohesive way in society. Because as you just alluded to, there is no standardized way to grow personally in an intrapersonal level, but you do need some framework that enables everyone to tend to, because we all have some uniformity between us at the end of the day. And those would be those foundational pillars because we are human. And those are what
Exactly.
you are
Like,
elaborating on.
yeah, like if you look at the foundation of any community, society, dare I say, religion that has lasted through the ages, like they all have a foundation of shared values
Of
and a
course.
foundation of a shared approach to the embodiment of life.
Hmm.
And we're, as globalization unfolds, right, like those specific modalities of going through that are being kind of just diminished,
Absolutely.
more and more and more. And on one hand, that's beautiful, like in the sense that like we're beginning to come together more as a species, right? Like the walls that used to divide us from those different modalities are getting knocked down, which is great and beautiful. And on the other hand, it's leaving people collectively, from my subjective perspective, very confused
Hmm.
about like who they are and what the framework for embodiment of being human actually looks like for them, right? And
Yeah.
so like there's space for something to fill that void, if you will. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's a very interesting segue here because I did want to ask you about the spiritual element and that foundational pillar there, and that we see obviously that, especially in the Western world, religion has played a much more diminished role in society, and we've been seeking different ways to fill that slot for meaning. So when it comes to the spiritual realm, why in the first place do you think it's even important to interact with the divine, or to have that fill something within us to inspire meaning, to encourage us to move forward, to use as a framework that can bypass any adversity in our lives? Why do you think that that's important in the first place?
Yeah, I would say like, I mean, that's a big question.
Mm.
um, but if I were to try and simplify it, like this is a quote that I'm sure many people have heard before, but it goes something along the lines of like, I am not a human seeking a spiritual experience. I am a human currently undergoing a human experience, or I am a spirit currently undergoing a human
Yeah,
experience,
reversing that makes
right?
sense.
Yeah, and so like I align with the notion that I chose to incarnate as this
Yeah.
version of a human being, right? I align with the notion that my soul, the energetic imprint of my beingness, existed before this physical carbon flesh body,
Hmm.
right? And whether or not you choose to align with that outlook, nonetheless, there is an aspect of being human that inherently highlights, for anyone willing to look in that direction, the potentiality of something more,
For sure.
right? Like we all have that intrinsic knowing that there's at least the possibility of something
Yes.
more, right?
Yes.
And for me, to have that intrinsic intuitive knowing within oneself and to consciously ignore it is like it doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah, it's
So
almost
at
counterintuitive at that point.
Right. So at the very least, look at that aspect of yourself. Look at the part of yourself that is like, hey, there's something more here, right?
Hmm.
And pursue whatever develops through the process of you looking at that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because why not?
Yeah. Well, there's an interesting storytelling element too, because you don't know how that story is going to end. And I think that's greatly part of the allure. It's like we almost don't want to know all the answers because the lack of answers is what keeps us curious, is what keeps us seeking in the direction of the unknown.
Mm,
And that's why I find it very important too to look into, let's say, the spiritual realm, whichever approach that you deem most suitable for yourself, because I feel like there's so much more unknown to life than there is known. And that's almost factual. There's so much more that we don't know. So I think that we need somewhere to place the abstraction. It's almost a given that there is an abstraction to everything. Even when you look at beauty, for example, beauty can be conceptualized as an abstraction, and then we have the sensations of beauty, or we have the different representations of beauty through artwork, through interacting with other people, through the things that we create. But from a Platonian standpoint, or Platonic standpoint more specifically, it's the fact that there are a theory of forms, that forms do exist in the abstract realm, and we need to place them somewhere in our mind. And that's where I think the divinity aspect comes in, because it keeps us searching for that unknown. And I think a lot of that is both innate within us, because we want to explore and we want to expand and simply just evolve. It's literally embedded into our nature to try and continuously evolve, especially as conscious sentient beings. But also because we're
mm,
aware that there's more than meets the eye, phys- from the things that we experience physically, I think we need some sort of, I don't want to use religious from the in the organized sense, but like a religious sort of dogma or a framework or a divine inspiration that categorizes that place for us in our minds, so it's not too obscure. And I think that that's what provides meaning to us. It connects us with that unknown much more, knowing that it's so much more beyond so much bigger than we are. And I think that that's
right.
something that's
And
inspirational.
that's
That's why
like
I'm very curious.
I would say that like the foundation of being a human is the need for meaning,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
Like from a very young age, we come into this realm, this density, this reality, and we're just like confused little children, right? We're like little scientists that are just like, okay, I'm gonna just experiment and explore with like this entire world that doesn't make any sense
It's
to me
just a
right now,
playground. Exactly. There's
right?
no
Yeah, and
heuristic
so
for it yet.
exactly, and so every single thing we do, we're in pursuit of trying to understand what does this mean,
Yeah.
right? Like what is this, and through our experiences, we come up with conclusions, and then we attach meaning to those experiences, right? which
Absolutely.
which
Yeah.
gives us concepts, it gives us a frame of reference for understanding and navigating this third dimensional realm, necessarily so, right? Like
Mhm.
we have to this reality has an incredibly large amount of data, right? And we have incredibly complex brains that are capable of processing large amounts of data. But in order to allow our conscious mind to just live without just processing data 24/7, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
We create concepts, we compartmentalize the data, and then we give it meaning in order to create stories, in order to just simplify
Yeah. We package it
being.
away so we don't have to always overthink it every time that we are exposed to it. And
Right,
and that
exactly. And
gives us
so I
meaning.
think the notion of that is applicable to spiritual pursuits in a certain regard, right? Because we, even though it's something potentially incomprehensible,
Mhm.
we still compartmentalize it into a box of incomprehensible, right?
Yes. Yeah.
In order to
Absolutely.
simplify
That's the
the
thing. We need a
magnitude of
place to
complexity.
categorize
Like,
that abstraction, that divinity,
yeah,
that concept
yeah,
that we cannot interact with in a tangible way. So now let's synthesize this into how you do this with clients, and how you interact with people, and how the constituents of option C have delved deeper into this work. So firstly, what has been the most interesting or unexpected experience you've had with people interacting with those pillars?
yeah. Many things.
I can imagine.
um, I think like if I were to peel back the onion like all the way to like the base layers of fascinations is the human compulsion to resist what it hasn't already concluded as true, like cognitive dissonance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and directly aligned with what we were just talking about, like in up until the age of 6 or 7, right, we're operating in theta and delta brainwaves. We're essentially in a meditative trance-like state for the first 7 years of our life, where we're a sponge, right? And we're just, as a result, programmed by the ideologies, perceptions, and experiences that are imposed upon us.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, we attach meaning and create stories and then carry forward the rest of our life, most of us unconsciously unaware of the stories that we're holding that establish the framework through which we understand reality, right? And so, like, most of the people I work with, one of the very first things that where we kind of like butt heads is like, okay, well, if you're working with me, like, I'm gonna shatter all of your
Yeah,
stories,
you break through
right?
it.
Like, the very first step is like, I don't even care what your stories are. I don't care how much I do or don't agree with them. None of that matters. What we're going to do is break them all, right? And then if in picking up the pieces, you consciously decide that you want to put them back together the way that they were, some or all of them, great, cool.
Mm.
But first we got to break them all, you know?
Oh, that's an interesting metaphor.
And like, I understand the resistance to doing that. Like, it's incredibly uncomfortable to like enter a space and be like, there exists a possibility that the way that I have perceived life up until this point is in its entirety fundamentally inaccurate. Like, that is understandably a position where a human being would hold resistance, right?
For sure.
But like, what fascinates me is like, if you don't do that, if you never take the time in your life to do that for yourself, then you're just operating on programming. You're just operating on the brainwashed ideological perceptions that were handed to you against your own capacity to choose whether or not you wanted them.
I see.
You know, and then people complain about like all of life, and it's like, well,
It's like,
you know, like,
you didn't enact the agency to be able to make those choices that are
agency
congruent
is a
with
key
yourself.
word there, right? Like,
I see.
yeah,
That's so fascinating, because it's like you have to break the ceiling above you, and that ceiling is also your floor at the same time, because it's what's allowing you to stand on some steady ground, to have some reasonable understanding of life at the end of the day, right? It's your box, it's your comfort zone, it's what enables you to organize yourself and cooperate in society, but you have to shatter that, as you were alluding to be able to see what's past it, see what's past that ceiling, because or else you're going to stay in that section the entire time. You're going to stay in that box,
right. And then, sorry, but this is, I don't mean to cut you, but like something that's charged right now, which is directly aligned with everything we've been talking about, like the power of the spiritual pillar in that regard is that in the shattering of your, what we could call egoistic perception of reality, right? If you have a conscious connection with the divine, right? Call it God, call it the universe, call it whatever you want to call it. You open the doorway to the potentiality of you surrendering to the support of that divine energy.
Oh, you'll
right?
always
And
have
so,
the floor.
right. So like God is the simplest way to explain this, I would believe, because most of us conceptualize God as like an entity capable of holding us, right? But if you have a conscious connection with God, and you're like, okay, I'm going to shatter my entire perception of reality right now, which is going to leave me in an incredibly vulnerable, incredibly raw, incredibly confused and exposed space, right? And you have various assortments of reasons for why that is dangerous, right? Like, of course there's resistance, but if you push through that resistance into the surrender of the support of God, then you're not alone. You'll
never just be in free fall. You'll always be supported. You'll always be in
God
some
will
incubator.
always be there to catch you, right?
Yes,
like, and if you have that in your life, then the entire process is so much more seamless.
Absolutely. I really love that, man. And I'm trying to imagine myself going through this particular roadmap with these foundational pillars here. And my question would be, well, if I'm, let's say, a vulnerable individual and I really do feel depleted in one or more areas of my life, those four that you had mentioned, how would you equip me with the skills, the fortitude, even just the mentality, or some sort of pre-framework, if you may, that will enable me to accept the breaking of that ceiling, or that will allow me to accept the shattering of what I currently understand? Because if I'm already in a vulnerable position, I think conceptually it makes sense, as we were just talking about now, that the understanding and appreciation of the surrender of God will allow you to always be held, will always make sure that you will be okay no matter what situations at play. But what are some, I guess, tools that you've used in your life or what you share with other people to make sure that they can handle it and they don't come out of it the other side in a much more damaged way?
I mean, it's interesting you use the word damage there at the end. So I fundament like at the base of this is something that I call the paradox of healing,
Oh,
right? So
nice.
most people come to a coach or a counselor or someone that they perceive as capable of helping them heal,
Yeah,
um, with the intention of feeling better, right? Like we pursue modalities of healing because we want to feel better.
truly, yeah.
And the paradox of healing is that in order to feel better, you have to first feel the pain,
Mm,
right? And so it's like Aubrey Marcus talks about this. Actually,
yeah.
I saw a video of him talking about this once, where in the video he uses the analogy of a broken bone, and if you break a bone and then allow it to heal without going to the doctor, and it heals misaligned, right? And then months later, it's still bugging you. So you go to the doctor and you're like, hey, I think I broke a bone a few months ago. It's still bugging me, blah, blah. He looks at it. He's like, oh, indeed, you broke a bone. And indeed, it's healed in a misaligned fashion. The
Mm,
very first thing the doctor's going to do is re-break that bone,
that makes
right? So,
sense.
so
Yeah.
when we develop stories in our youth that are misaligned with the truth of our soul, and then live our whole lives operating through the outlook of those stories, the first thing that we have to do when we decide, okay, these are not serving me, is break them, right?
Is
You
yeah,
like, which
exactly.
which is counterintuitive to the pursuit, right? Which is also why like this material world of quick fix and consumerism is so prevalent, right? Because people are like, I want to feel better, so then they get on their little social media dopamine hits, or take drugs and alcohol, or porn, sex, like gambling. The list of human escapist tendencies is very long, right? But every single one of those is just like a quick feel good.
Yes,
And
yeah.
the truth of that is actually that's the opposite of what you want to do. You need to feel the pain. You need
Yeah.
to break yourself, right? And then on the other side of actually processing and feeling all of that pain comes what it is that you're seeking. So, and this isn't directly answering your question. It's just interesting that at the end you use the word damn it. Like, people want to feel undamaged, but it's like, well, you kind of like, through
Damage
the way that
is
we use that
yeah.
terminology, you kind of need to like go into the damage. Like,
Yes, in order to come out of it actually and to
yeah,
heal from it, right? And I know what you mean is counterintuitive because especially the people who are in those positions, they're seeking, sometimes the first thing to just help them to make them feel better because they're in such a depleted position. And that's what's really tough is that's why I'm curious if there's some sort of buoyancy that you can provide them to make sure that they don't fall deeper and don't keep digging themselves into
totally.
bad
So
patterns.
the way that Option C is scaling as a
Hmm.
brand, is where it will land and where it's scaling towards is fundamentally different than the work that I do specifically.
Okay, yeah, let's talk
But they're
about
but
that.
they are they my personal brand eventually dissolutes and scales into like the larger initiative. But the work that I do is establishing this framework and establishing this understanding. So a basic comprehension of the whole process, again, physically, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, is looking at what do I believe to be true about myself in reality? Why do I hold these beliefs? And how are these beliefs serving me? Right. And
Mm,
this is a reflective process that guides the individual into a position of kind of like approaching the conceptual ground zero of their truth. Right. And in that process, up come limiting beliefs and up come traumas and up come realizations and a lot of things, emotions, right, that have been stored and haven't been felt. And through that process, okay, cool. Here's where you're at in life. Now that we're clear on that, what do you want your life to look like? Again, physically, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually. Why is it that you want it to look that way? And then how are you going to make it happen? Right.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so then you go, you take the time to do the actual work and actually get crystal clear with yourself on where you're at and why that's where you're at. And then you have an empowered stance to move forward in life towards the direction of your intention, who it is you wish to become. But this isn't, again, there's no answer here. Like no one is ever told this is who you want to be physically. This is the ideal physical version. It's like, no, what is alive within you? Who do you want to
It's
become?
not something you
Right.
could be told. Yeah, it's only something that's
Right.
felt within.
And so I guide that process, right? And that takes, sometimes a few months, sometimes a bit longer. But currently at this point, when people get to that, like, okay, say for example, in my physical pillar, I want to get super into fitness. I want to get into CrossFit, and I want to start training monthly, 4 days a week in the gym, whatever. I personally am not the CrossFit coach that helps that person.
Makes sense. So
I'd
you're
be like, okay,
facilitating.
cool. Yeah, you have that orientation, you have that desire. Great, cool. I have CrossFit coaches that I know in my network that I might refer someone to, or find your own coach, whatever. But that highlights then where option C as a platform is scaling, is that as things develop and as the mobile app is finished and lands in place, then within that entire space and container, one can go through this process. And when they get to that point, there will be a database of coaches, counselors, and healers in each physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual modality. So, for example, if you
Okay.
decide you want to activate yourself in yoga, you could get partnered up with a yoga teacher, CrossFit coach, breath work, whatever different modalities of becoming. And so as we scale, that will be available within a set space. So again, it's like, it's not that there is an answer, it's that we have a framework that empowers an individual to cultivate their own answer, become aware of their own answer, and begin taking action in the direction of who it is they want to become. And as you take that action, you do so within a community of knowledgeable people who understand the mechanism of embodiment, share your values and principles, and can provide support and growth in different forms and fashions. Yeah.
And then as a result of that, it seems like the framework itself is ever evolving. And that's what's so unique. We always talk about, especially here today, you're familiar with the concept and the term of shifting paradigms. And the fact that we need to shift old paradigms. And I guess where my mind goes there is, yes, I agree, but what about 50 years down the road when we keep saying that again? When we say, oh, now we have to reshift our paradigms again. Now we have to change our paradigms because they won't suit the time of now, which makes sense. Of course, time is always evolving, and we're always changing. But how can we create a framework that is evolving with the times? And that's particularly what it seems like you are doing.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time philosophizing, analyzing, observing both myself and the world. And it's like, this is, to the best of my knowledge, the simplest framework that can establish a cultural bedrock of full holistic human embodiment.
Yeah, it's really
right? Like
beautiful.
what does it look like to live in the highest potential of your human physical self now versus 200 years from now? It doesn't matter. The idea is physically to activate the height of that potential. Maybe 200 years from now, like people are literally like levitating and flying. I don't know, right? But like if that becomes a potentiality within our physical pillar, pursue it, right? Like that's just the base essence of it. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, I know everyone's in good hands because I always feel so comfortable and so inspired when I'm around you. Unfortunately, we're so pressed for time. So my last question for you would be, is there a personal philosophy that you take with you everywhere you go that has helped you throughout your life that you've taken to option C to Auburn Stoics, but also something that you embody personally outside of any professional endeavors?
I mean, you know the answer to that. It's stoicism. Yeah.
Yes, there we go.
But what's interesting? Stoicism and Buddhism actually emerged around the same time. I think there's like a few hundred years in between the emergence of the two ideologies, philosophies, and I have this feeling that like the two are actually like the same.
Yeah.
Like stoicism is much more perceived, at least, as like this intellectual philosophy, where I think Buddhism is perceived much more as like this kind of spiritual, some people even call it religion
Yeah.
philosophy. But there is a potentiality of the merging of the two, right? Like the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold
Mm-hmm.
Path to embodying the Four Noble Truths, like that is a process that ultimately brings one into like the foundational bedrock of stoicism,
Yes,
right? Like
exactly. And how they seek
they're
truth.
yeah. And so I align quite profoundly with stoicism and Buddhism. I'm more knowledgeable in stoicism, I would say, but I think the merging of those two is something the future of humanity should look at.
It's a cool dance. Well,
Yeah.
as we're just upon the last few seconds here, please let people know where to find you.
Yeah, you can find my personal brand, Jono Hendricks, on Instagram. Jan Olaf Hendricks is my personal page, or jonohendricks.com,
Love that.
JONOHENDRICKS.com. Yeah.